Spit that out right now. This is the Superhuman Channel. Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
One of the most popular questions I see on peptide Facebook pages is what peptide is good for weight loss and fat loss. And usually I comment back something snide like, just try dieting first, But the reality is that there is a peptide that can actually speed fat loss. And let's face it, weight loss products are the most popular category in all supplements. Everybody, whether you're just an average person or an athletic type or a would-be bodybuilder, you have used and you will probably use again weight loss products. Well, we're going to talk about something that really works. And it's a very interesting peptide that we're going to talk about, GLP-1, because it also may help with the ravages of aging. I did a show in 2007 with a scientist from Rutgers University. You've heard me talk about it. It was one of those watershed interviews where he showed that glucose signaling is what triggered cellular senescence. And in simplest terms, if you have ragingly high blood sugar all the time, your body's aging rapidly. This peptide could actually help in this condition as well. So for the folks who don't know what a GLP-1 agonist is, let's start there.
So basically stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. And when we eat food, there's cells called LKL cells in our intestine, our small intestine, that are triggered to release GLP-1. And GLP-1 is what then controls sort of insulin release. And so really within about 10 minutes of eating, you'll see GLP-1 go up. It doesn't stay around for a really long time, but it controls, so you actually get some insulin release, but it controls insulin sensitivity so that your cells react appropriately, and then your insulin levels come back down, your glucose levels come back down. So it keeps your glucose levels in check. Also helps regulate satiety. So if you take mice who have no GLP-1, they will just eat and eat and eat and eat. So people who have lower GLP-1 or who, have screwed up intestinal cells, things like that, lots of times they don't ever get satiety. They just sit and they eat and they don't ever really feel full. So that's the other thing GLP-1s do, is they actually sort of make us feel full. So that's kind of on the intestinal level, sort of on that controlling insulin release, controlling sort of this, so that it's like glucagon-like receptors. So we know there's this interplay between glucagon and insulin that has to be very balanced. And, when that gets out of balance and you get these spike insulin surges and you have no insulin control, then you start turning towards type 2 diabetes. So it helps insulin sensitivity, regulates insulin release, helps cell sensitivity to insulin, and helps regulate our body's sort of the digestion of the food and our satiety. So kind of everything you think about for weight loss or fat loss, right?
So Ron Penna and I were talking recently, and I was complaining that it's a mistake to just look at blood sugar. You have to look at blood sugar and insulin. And he said, and glucagon. And obviously this is glucagon-like peptide, so it acts like glucagon. Why would he say that? What does postprandial changes in blood sugar and insulin with the presence or without the presence of glucagon, how is that different?
Well, remember that glucagon and so the glucagon-like peptide receptor it's what causes that insulin release, but also insulin sensitivity. So it balances, so we get this nice little release of insulin. We want the release of insulin when we eat, right? Or when we exercise, when we do things, we want that insulin release, but we don't want it to go unchecked. So we get this appropriate release. So what the glucagon does is it balances that release of insulin. If I just measure insulin level and it's high, that might be appropriate for what I was doing at the time. For instance, if I exercise and I measure insulin level, it will probably be higher. But what we want is this balance of being able to regulate that the cells are appropriately sensitive. And that's what glucagon tells us, is what the glucagon levels is tell us that we have adequate insulin sensitivity and we have appropriate sort of release and then decline of the insulin level. So the glucagon is what kind of controls that insulin sensitivity. So you need to know that to see if the cells are truly being sensitive to that insulin, if you're releasing the insulin appropriately. Insulin's not a bad thing, right? We need insulin. If you're a type 1 diabetic, you die. If they have no insulin, right? They die. So we need insulin, but we need it to be appropriately in check. And that's what that glucagon balance is. So that's what Ron was talking about was making sure that we have those things in a balance. So we appropriately responding to insulin.
Right. And
ourselves insulin sensitive in a sense, right?
And that's a big one, because let's face it, the thing that's killing people today is insulin resistance,
right?
Which is the opposite of insulin sensitive. And so anything that will improve insulin receptor sensitivity has to be a good thing in this day and age. So
exactly.
So GLP-1 agonists are prescribed for people with type 2 diabetes. And that has pretty much been explored. But now we're talking about just let's say normal people who don't have, or they're not pre-diabetic or diabetic, looking at this peptide. So it's not just about fat loss, is it either? This may actually, GLP-1 may actually deliver on all the failed promises of metformin without any of the negative effects.
Right. I honestly think this, if we get it to a cost-effective place, is going to be really coming toward one of our mainstays as an anti-aging drug. So initially what they saw is obviously if you control insulin in a diabetic, you're going to get fat loss, and that makes sense. But what they did in their studies is independent of whether there was the same exact insulin and glucose levels, that it was not, so it wasn't really dependent on the insulin and glucose that there was fat loss. There was something more going on, that the GLP-1 agonists in and of themselves were causing fat loss. And, so even in non-diabetic, they would see this pretty significant fat loss. And so they started exploring what was going on with that. And what they found is that GLP-1 actually had some significant effects that were way beyond its effects on insulin. So that the fat loss effects are not simply due to insulin control. So people like you and I who are not diabetic still can get fat loss. Carl, this is so important because honestly, as a physician, if you look at what we do, unfortunately, to overweight people, they come in and what do your doctors say? They exactly what you just said: eat better. And I get whenever I do posts on on Instagram posts or something on fat loss, everybody's like, it's all diet and exercise. Unfortunately, it's not all diet and exercise for everybody. Those people, and we become kind of hypercritical. These people, they're just eating shitty, right? And they did a great study. This is, I can't remember now, maybe 15 years ago. It was a long time ago, where they actually took these people who said, I can't lose weight, doc. I'm eating nothing. And, and everybody's like, that's bullshit, right?
Right.
They actually took these people, they put them in a hospital setting where they literally had them 24/7 monitored.
Like a metabolic lab.
And they followed them, they fed them at specific times. And there was, and some did lose weight when they put them in that, but there was a group of people who didn't, who is still, no matter what they did, their fat sort of stayed up. And they kind of, if you think about from sort of a genetic perspective, maybe those are meant to be the survivors, right? If there's a zombie apocalypse and there's no food around,
they're going to last.
They're going to last, right? Those people who need to eat tons of protein to survive are going to die, but those people who are sort of going to still have some fat loss when there's no food to eat are going to survive that. So there may be some genetic predisposition to some people who are just designed to kind of store fat, but it becomes a struggle. So you tell them to eat better and things like that. And that's all we do for them. We say, follow this diet, do this exercise plan, and they become increasingly frustrated with us, right? And we really have had, we have bariatric surgery.
Which is horrible, by the way.
Which is right. And causes all sorts of malabsorption syndromes and things like that, right? And, initially, one of the ways that we think that bariatric surgery works is not just by sort of shortening the gut, but also actually by its effect on GLP-1. Interesting, when you do bariatric surgery, you increase GLP-1 levels in people. So it may have other effects, but since fen-phen, which had all its cardiac issues, there has not been a good weight loss drug. So about a month ago now, a GLP-1, a long-acting GLP-1 agonist was actually approved by the FDA for fat loss, and it's under the trade name now Wegovy. But it was actually approved for fat loss, and these people lost 15 to 20% of body fat in a period of, I think it was 16 weeks, 20 weeks. It was pretty rapidly, even without significant dietary changes. If you had dietary changes along with that. And they were able to maintain it even when they stopped the drug, a lot of them, that they were able to actually, if they now kept eating well, they were actually able to maintain it. It may have taken being on the drug for a long time, but they were able to maintain it. They did gain some of the body weight back. So I think as doctors, we and I think as people in general, right? You see these heavy people and you just think, I wish they would just eat right and exercise. And I think we have to start rethinking that it really is not all diet and exercise. There is something more to the story. And
Right.
we have to be able to offer things to people, because obesity is a huge risk factor for every disease, right?
I just did a show. It's funny. I just did a show yesterday. The number one killer of Americans is insulin resistance. And I can prove that. Even though the CDC says the top 4 are cancer, and not in any particular order, cancer, heart disease, stroke, and Alzheimer's. Who gets cancer? Diabetic people.
Mm-hmm.
Who gets heart disease? Diabetic people. Who gets Alzheimer's disease? Diabetic people. Who has strokes? Diabetic people. So it's disingenuous for the government and the medical orthodoxy to go, we have to cure heart disease. And the analogy I gave yesterday is if I'm driving down the highway and somebody shoots me and I veer off the road and go down a ravine and crash, and the coroner puts on my death certificate, I died because I went off the road and crashed. No, I died because someone shot me. That's why I went off the road. So ignoring the contribution of type 2 diabetes, living with type 2 diabetes, to ultimately dying of heart disease and stroke and all these other things, it's nonsense. And we can't fix the problem until we start being honest about what the problem really is. And the problem is type 2 diabetes. So, this GLP-1, this peptide, I want to keep calling it a peptide because this is the pep talk.
Right.
We're talking about peptides, and that's what we're talking about.
Right.
This peptide could actually be so beneficial. There are a lot of people out there that have insulin resistance because they have high iron load, because they have high inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
That makes cells insulin resistant, that they're eating right, but something else is going on with them. This could actually be like a temporary swoop in and save them while we try to figure out. Now, you said that it has anti-inflammatory effects, right? I'm going to put this graphic up real quick for a second. So this is GLP-1 as an anti-inflammatory. Talk about this a little bit.
Right. So remember, glucagon-like peptide. So this is just a simple peptide. It's a 30 amino acid peptide. And, so initially we're like, okay, well, it's working just on insulin. That's its whole story. Well, now there's been studies, and a lot of these studies came out of China there, and a lot of them really relatively recently, interestingly, they're looking at GLP-1 effects on all of these inflammatory markers. So a lot of your listeners are familiar with like tumor necrosis factor alpha,
Sure.
TNF alpha, and interleukin 6. Those are sort of the inflammatory cytokines, the proteins that accelerate as we age, or the disease processes that are causing worsening disease, worsening aging. So those are kind of considered the age-related cytokines. Almost everybody's TNF alpha and interleukin 6 increase as they age, some people more than others. But TNF alpha and interleukin 6, you can see, if you look at this graphic, are linked to a lot of diseases. Kidney, almost everybody starts to lose kidney function as they age. Well, TNF alpha, right? Almost everybody starts to get decline in pulmonary function as they age. So if you can block a lot of these inflammatory cytokines, look what you can do. I mean, I do, one of my primary parts of my practice is orthopedics. And so I do a lot of orthopedics. Well, interleukin-1 beta, which you see here listed under the liver and the brain, we also are now linking interleukin-1 beta very significantly to degenerative disc disease and to joint pain. So we know that maybe this drug and there's a study that came out of China in 2020 showing that its effect on pain simply by blocking some of these cytokines that actually had pretty dramatic effects on pain from things like osteoarthritis. So by blocking all of these inflammatory cytokines, we're affecting every organ system. Now, this same picture you can sort of link to what happens as we age. Our liver function decreases, our pancreatic function decreases. We get more atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. So when I talk about this peptide being the ultimate anti-aging peptide, I think this graphic gives you a pretty clear picture of why that might be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing that interests me the most is the protective effects on the brain and the nervous system.
Right.
So I'm wondering if weaving this into the discussion. So diabetic neuropathy, I believe, has more to do with hyperinsulinemia than raging blood sugar, because high insulin levels have been shown to damage very small blood vessels that feed the nerves, and then the nerves go to sleep. Do you think that the reason that people develop diabetic neuropathy is because of an imbalance between glucagon and insulin? Is there any evidence that this type of a peptide could be beneficial to people who suffer from that?
Yeah. So this study that looked at pain showed very interestingly in diabetic neuropathy that they actually had that there was actually glucagon-like peptide receptors on nerve endings and in spinal fluid on sort of the what's called the dorsal spinal thalamic tract, which is our pain tract, that sort of seems to be upregulated in diabetic neuropathy. You know, that horrible sort of burny pain they get, right? It's just that
it's hyperalgesia. It's not numbness, it's hyperalgesia. Yeah.
And that's in the spinal thalamic tract, in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. The spinal thalamic tract is what transmits those impulses. And when you actually increased GLP-1, you reduced those impulses. So that disruption of GLP-1 may actually be related to some of the pain in diabetic neuropathy. So they actually found that the GLP-1 agonists were super helpful, independent of their effect on insulin, glucagon, and sugar levels, that they were still helpful for pain. So that's where I'm saying this peptide is actually it's found on a lot of different organs, including nerves. So, you know, is maybe some of the hyperalgesic pain with diabetic neuropathy related to altered levels of glucagon-like peptide 1, you know, in these nerves, and that being downregulated. So, you know, so there's a lot of interesting work still to be done in that realm. And I think that we're going to see maybe some effect on it in helping with back pain for the same reason, because chronic back pain has some similarities to that too, where that's just chronic achy back pain that people get. So I think we're going to see some interesting research on these GLP-1s now that they're getting a little bit more widely used and widely accepted because of the, you know, the number of organ systems involved in them. You know, when we go to the brain, so they're in phase 3 trials. The GLP-1 agonists are in phase 3 trials right now for Alzheimer's as a prevention for Alzheimer's. You know, so right now we just had, you know, approval of Aduhelm, and you know, and which is a drug that if you have dementia, it reduces your decline by about the same level as exercise.
That's not Aricept, right?
No, it's the new drug that just got sort of controversial FDA approval, and so Aduhelm is, and you know, it controversial because honestly, it reduced your decline. You didn't stop the decline, but it reduced the decline about the same as if you have people exercise. So, you know, and it's $50,000 a year. You know, so pretty controversial FDA approval of that drug. Well, GLP-1 agonists may actually have a very protective benefit to the brain, and maybe actually reverse some cognitive issues, at least so they're in phase 3 trials right now looking at this as an Alzheimer's drug. And, you know, and I think it's going to be a lot more beneficial than some of the newer drugs that have come out, because it's addressing there's a lot of pathology that goes on with dementia. So those neuroprotective effects. But even when we talk about the weight loss, it's interesting that we actually now think the weight loss has to do with the brain effects as well. So that's what I was saying.
So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about hunger and satiety using this peptide. I also want to talk about long and short acting versions of this peptide. But before we do that, I have to take a break. I want to plug boulderlongevity.com. If you are watching or listening to this show and you think, man, she's that doctor, she knows what she's talking about, and you'd like to work with Dr. Yurth, very easy. She's licensed in just about every state in America. And all you have to do is go to boulderlongevity.com, reach out to somebody at the office, and they will connect you. And she does telemedicine. Thanks to one of the nice things about COVID is telemedicine became acceptable. Literally the day before COVID, no, doctors can't do that. The day after COVID is like, oh yeah, sure, doctors can do these things over Zoom calls from now on. So the one thing that came out of this pandemic that I'm very happy about. We're going to take one quick commercial break, and we'll be right back to talk more. And I see questions lining up. I promise we will get to every question. Stay tuned. You are watching and listening to Superhuman Radio. We will be right back. Mimetic Health is a premium telehealth platform that connects customers with partnered providers from the comfort of your home. Mimetic provides concierge service with your very own patient care provider as your health advocate. You'll go over all your needs and goals, from improving sexual function, hair loss prevention, increased muscle, fat loss, and overall improved performance. Prescribed treatment options can be ordered and shipped directly to you if you meet the requirements. All from the comfort of your home. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Mimetic Health. That's MarekHealth. And order your comprehensives and get 10% off with code SHR. Don't forget to add the lab analysis to have results reviewed with potential over-the-counter supplements or treatment recommendations. That's shrnetwork.biz/Mimetic Health and use code SHR at checkout. Or order your own desired labs with code SHR and get 10% off your first lab order. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. I've said numerous times that Be Strong BFR bands are as effective, if not more effective, than anabolic steroids. And as someone who has used anabolic steroids for many years and used Be Strong BFR bands, I know what I'm talking about. You will see changes in musculature in days and weeks using Be Strong BFR bands, and without any of the risks to your health associated with anabolic steroid use. Go to shrnetwork.biz/BeStrong, that's BSTRONG, and use code SHR15 to save 15% off. I guarantee you will not be disappointed in the results of using the Be Strong bands. Check them out. There are lots of concerns about food supply today. That's why you need White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures will deliver food right to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and be disappointed by shopping in grocery stores. The finest beef, pork, lamb, duck, and more can be found at White Oak Pastures. And now they even have seafood. And best of all, White Oak Pastures has a negative carbon footprint, which means that you don't have to feel guilty for eating your ribeye. Go to shrnetwork.biz/White Oak and use the code Superhuman to save 15% off. There have been no real breakthroughs in resistance training for over 200 years. Whether it's pulleys or free weight, they all depend on gravity and the angles associated with gravity's effect directly on the weight. All of that has changed with the ARX machine. ARX stands for Adaptive Resistance. The ARX machine uses a 25 horsepower motor. You are literally fighting against a 25 horsepower motor, so every single rep is your 1 rep maximum at that moment in time. But ARX leverages another technique that has been known to produce rapid muscle gains and strength, and that is it leverages the eccentric or negative portion of the rep, which completely blows every other exercise and resistance training product out of the water. Go to shrnetwork.biz/ARX and discover the future of resistance training. Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Elizabeth Yurth today from Boulder Longevity about GLP-1, a fascinating peptide that actually can help you lose weight. So let's start with this. There are long-acting and short-acting versions of these. Can you tell us what the difference is and the names of the long-acting versus the short-acting, if you have those at your fingertips?
So, basically, like if you say, I'm going to just go buy some GLP-1, right, which you can go buy GLP-1 as a peptide. And the problem with GLP-1 is it's broken down pretty rapidly by an enzyme called DPP4. And so what they've done with these drugs is they've tagged them to an enzyme blocker as well. So they stay longer in your system, because the problem is if I just take GLP-1, it's going to be there for a very brief time, which, it might help. Like, so let's say you eat a big, huge, meal, it might help for even that to do that, right? To do a little GLP-1, just
before the
GLP-1
meal,
before a meal or something like that, right? And then there's the short acting, which have been probably around the longest. The the trade name of the one that's probably most common out there is called exenatide. And there's a long acting actually and a short acting exenatide as well. So the short acting exenatide, people usually have to do twice a day, kind of at their biggest meals. And, and they're going to be broken down, within about 3 or 4 hours. So they'll you basically get released and then broken down within about 3 or 4 hours. So they're going to really help control that blood glucose. But the problem is that when you look at a lot of the other effects that we're looking at, when we looked at all those anti-inflammatory effects that we talked about, so those more anti-aging or brain effects, we probably need the GLP-1s around a little bit longer to have a dramatic effect. So what they've done with some of the semaglutide, which is under the trade name of either Ozempic for diabetes or Wegovy for weight loss. So those are they basically block the DPP-4 for long enough that you can actually take them once a week, and so keep pretty elevated levels of GLP-1s over an extended period of time. Hence, we're going to now look at all those end organ benefits. That graph that you showed, or that picture that you showed, showing all these organ benefits. Well, those are probably going to be so if I'm going to want to see all these changes in my inflammatory cytokines, I probably need those GLP-1 agonists around more than just an hour, right? So we need them to sort of stick around. So what they found is that these longer actings had much more dramatic effects. Now, incidentally, they also showed much better results with weight loss than the short acting. So in a diabetic, the short acting,
in the long acting, they found
the long actings, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So the long acting showed much more significant weight loss effects. I mean, markedly more, and that's because even though that's what's sort of demonstrating to us that there's more going on with this fat loss than just insulin control, because you can probably control insulin, glucagon, and blood glucose levels in those diabetic patients or even non-diabetic patients using the short acting, but we don't get the weight loss. So they began to look at what other effects were going on and found that there's some pretty independent effects on the brain that seem to just encourage the body to lose fat. So 2 things happen. Number 1, you get significant improvement in satiety. So you just feel full faster. Now, that happens with the short acting a bit too, because they slow down sort of how fast your food moves through you. So you do get full a little bit faster. But the long actings, interestingly enough, you kind of just don't have that. So those people who feel like they want to eat all the time, so
you don't have that hunger drive,
right? You just don't have that drive to go eat. Somebody puts food in front of you, you're like, yeah, I'll eat because I need a little bit of food, but you don't feel that excess. And so what they found is that there's actually receptors on the brain that seem to really be helping to sort of change our outlook on food. And that may be where some of even the more kind of permanent or long-acting effects are going on, even after you stop the drug. You start changing some of these behaviors, maybe on a genomic level. So we look at the brain effects, both to increase satiety, but there may actually be more going on even than that. The brain sort of codes that we talked about those people who, from a genetic perspective, just the body wanted to stay fat. It may start changing that as well. That there seems to be a brain effect, maybe.
So the transcription of the
transcription may start changing, right?
Yeah.
And that's where they found it in the brain aging too. So there was a study that came out of China just recently that basically showed they looked at the transcriptomic response of the GLP-1 agonist, and this was done in mice, but they basically saw that there was a complete change in the expression of the genes that are linked to neurodegeneration and brain aging. So that we are actually changing brain aging on a genomic level, potentially, at least by this study, pretty significant, right? That we're actually changing the transcription of our genes in a fashion to slow and delay brain aging,
right?
In even a normal brain. So that's where the kind of cool thing about these long acting, where we can get some of these brain effects, may really pan out as having some really significant long-term benefits, is that we're actually changing our own sort of genomic expression a bit.
So Joel Green, who always flatters me by tuning into the show. Joel is brilliant. Do you know Joel?
I don't think so.
I have to introduce the 2 of you. He's out on the West Coast. Joel is brilliant. He said synergistic with this is mixing a small amount of fat with carbs, which helps GLP-1 secretion, improves GAC, and generally helps insulin work better. GAC, something under the curve. What is GAC?
I'm not sure what GAC Ask Joel. What's GAC?
Joel, what's GAC? But anyway, that's an interesting idea. So, and we will get to everybody's questions towards the end of the show, I promise. So, the long-acting ones seem to be the best if you're really driven for weight loss.
Yeah. So the longer acting GLP, so people did again get some exenatide, and I've experimented with this with my patients. I don't see dramatic weight loss with exenatide, but you will see some, especially in your sort of obese diabetics, right? Because you're just getting better insulin control. But in more normal people, who want to take off 20 pounds or whatever, you didn't really see it as much. Where glucose area under the curve. There you go.
That's what I thought it was. Yeah. Nomenclature. Okay. Thank you.
So basically, the exenatide did show some weight loss, but it was much more marked with the longer acting, but also at a much higher dose than is typical for just diabetes control.
Right.
So it did also, you need more of it. And we're talking, really kind of double the amount that we typically use for glucose control. With the tough thing being about these drugs, and I've tried them, and I will tell you from my own experience, you can get pretty bad nausea initially from them. So that's one of the side effects of all of the GLP-1 agonists, is they can cause a little bit of nausea. If you on the lower dosing, that's not very significant. As you get to higher doses, it can be pretty significant. It goes away, but I will tell you, it can be bad. I mean, I remember the first time I took one, I've seen a patient had to rock out of the room and throw up. I mean, so what we usually do is we start, so therapeutic dose for weight loss, for instance, of semaglutide, which is one of the long-acting GLP ones that's as a drug, it's Wegovy is its new name for treating obesity. It's 2.4 milligrams. That's double the diabetic
the diabetes dose. Yeah.
So, usually what we do is you start on you start people 1.25 milligrams and then 0.5 and then 1 and then 2, and you have to just encourage people. The nausea does get better and go away. I mean, I'm fine with them now, but
Now I want to make sure I'm understanding the nomenclature, right? So we have the long acting like Ozempic and the new diet version. Right. We have the short acting, which you use like maybe twice a day because they last a few hours.
Right.
And then you have just the raw peptide itself, which just lasts minutes.
Yeah, I think the GLP-1 agonists, I'm not sure how rapidly they're broken down, but I know it's pretty rapidly. Right. Probably still enough, like you said, if you want that acute effect, like I know I'm going to eat a big, huge steak or something, and I want to get this nice insulin control and good cell response to the insulin. And as Joel said, eating that fat helps, and already that you're eating the protein with the fat always helps, but or a carb with a fat always helps more than a straight carb, which is why drinking a soda is the worst thing you can do, right? But
right, because glucagon doesn't go up, just insulin goes up, and that's where the destruction occurs when,
you get that
when
big
there's
spike.
not a concomitant rise in glucagon along with insulin, because insulin naturally desensitizes the insulin receptor when it's high for very long. It's a protective effect the tissue does. So by the glucagon being there, kind of like a chaperone, the cells remain sensitive even though insulin is rising. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really fascinating.
And complex, right?
Yeah.
Which is why a lot goes wrong.
Yeah.
Especially when we are eating really healthy diets. But so basically, yeah. So I think probably the least expensive way to go about things would be to use a GLP-1, just a straight, glucagon like peptide 1, that you just buy, and you utilize that, and you utilize
about 20 micrograms right before a meal, like 15, 20 minutes before a meal seems to be
like even 5 micrograms probably, right? So 5 or 10 micrograms before a meal would probably have some beneficial effects.
Right.
But that's probably not going to help your people who want fat loss, right? That's not going to that might help with a little bit of insulin control. But it's probably not going to help with fat loss. It's going to take more sustained. And that's where we think that there's more going on than just insulin control, that the fat loss is much more complex, which is also why fat loss is hard. It is a lot more complex than just, getting, you've dealt with this, Carl. These people, you really do I have optimize their hormones. I have optimized their nutrients. I really do trust that they are, they're keeping me diet logs. They're, I've put them on, I've put CGMs on them. And things are not going anywhere. And
maybe we have confused metabolic shifts, right? So we know that people say, well, once you hit a plateau, you hit a wall because your metabolism wants to hold on to that fat. So it down regulates your metabolic rate in an effort to conserve and not lose more weight. Maybe it's not that at all, because that's always been this kind of mysticism, this like the body recognizes it's losing weight too fast, so it's going to put the brakes on it. Maybe the reality is that the threshold of insulin sensitivity didn't shift down yet, and that's why they hit a plateau. And glucagon, like peptide, may be what get them over a plateau.
Maybe there's some genomic piece, right? So maybe do we have people who are genetically expressing where there's something going on again deeper? Again, we're still sort of early in the investigation of all the things this peptide does, right? So we know it's genomically, because the transcriptome, it changes, at least in a neural fashion. When we look at the neural transcriptome, it's being changed. Are we genomically changing other pieces of, that's now changing those zombie apocalypse survivors into somebody who can, lose weight, with the downside now that they won't be able to survive the zombie apocalypse. But
now the long acting versions are very expensive, and those are the ones that people need to look at if they want, really enhanced weight loss. And it appears that doctors may prescribe it, but insurance won't pay for it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest struggle. I was actually pretty excited. So I've been using semaglutide, as Ozempic, and you have to dose it higher, but you can get the drug, or or try and get semaglutide itself if you can. But I was really kind of excited when the FDA approved Wegovy, because they said, now insurance will pay for it for obesity. Well, the problem is they don't, because insurances consider obesity a cosmetic problem. They don't understand that it's actually at the root of every disease. And if we fix obesity, we fix a lot of other diseases. So I literally have patients who, have BMIs of 50, have multiple comorbidities. They should be the perfect candidates for this. I have not yet had an insurance pay for it, and I've tried multiple times and multiple attempts. So I think, to buy it using, coupon codes like from GoodRx, places like that, it still ends up costing you about $800 a month. Now, might that be reasonable?
I mean, look, it's going to work. It's not like some scammy supplement, that guarantees to be a fat burner. This is actually going to work. It's been shown clinically to work and help weight loss. The question is $800 a month too rich? Because you're probably going to need. So this gives me a good chance to ask a question. So Dean Paulson said, he has several. Yeah. How long does it take for the benefits to kick in? If you're using a long acting, very expensive GLP-1 agonist, how fast do people see results?
So we're seeing people start losing weight pretty rapidly. Usually people have lost pretty significant weight within 12 weeks, so within 3 months of it. But, we're starting to see people lose weight really on a weekly basis. They'll be losing a couple of pounds. So, the studies were carried out over 68 weeks. So that's a long period of time, and where people lost up to 30%, so especially the heavier people lost a significant weight loss. But we're seeing pretty significant, a few pounds a week in our patients using this peptide. And I will tell you from my own experience with this patient, with my patients with this peptide, it really is, in medicine, we have not had a drug for weight loss. It's kind of odd, right? We've not had a drug for weight loss since fen-phen. That was the last one. When did that get pulled off the market? I can't remember.
That had to be in the 90s. That had to be in the early 90s.
Yeah, maybe even before. I can't remember, because of its cardiac issues, right? So it's kind of exciting. And, when you look at what people might be paying for weight loss programs at some point, this might not be.
This may be very competitive. This may
with the upside of, honestly, all those other health benefits. As I said, we may be just on the verge of all those other things. It's happening. I think particularly if you're somebody who has, a family history of some cognitive issues, or you're noticing you're 50 years old and you're already starting to notice a little mild cognitive issues. So the studies that were done, the study that's undergoing right now in phase 3 trials, they took patients who were just, mild cognitive impairment and early Alzheimer's, and they're seeing, it halt or reverse the dementia. So I think that's where we're finding a drug now that has such huge benefits. I hope it becomes a more cost-effective option, but I do think sometimes we do have to look at what we spend money on. And if you're somebody who does have, significant issues, you have pain, you have fatty liver disease, you have mild cognitive impairments, you have atherosclerosis, because we know that the GLP-1 agonists are really helpful for atherosclerosis as well. Is $800 a month a reasonable thing? It might be.
Well, when you lump everything together and say it's doing all these things for me, then people can justify it. Dean Paulson lives in Florida. I guess he must be from the UK originally. He says, my federal ID is UK. Can Dr. Yurth still work with me online as a patient? He lives in Florida.
Yes, we can. And actually, Dean, we actually have patients all over the world. We have patients in New Zealand, Australia. It's sometimes actually it's a little bit easier to work with patients outside of the country, interestingly enough. So
yeah, because you don't have the American.
The hard thing is amazingly, and talk bad about our medical system. I don't know if Dean can speak to this, but honestly, trying to get anything, even a lab done from people like in the UK, Australia, it is really difficult. So you can say all the bad things you want about our medical system, but at least we can just walk into
we have a lot.
I mean, walk into a lab and get a lab. You can't do that there.
I have friends in Canada that can't buy melatonin.
No, you can't get melatonin. They
can't get vitamin C and anything bigger than 60 milligram tablets.
No, I was just talking to one of my patients in New Zealand last night, and she's like, yeah, her melatonin all got pulled off at customs. I mean,
I mean, Canada is a nanny state, right? The government thinks you're just too stupid to take care of yourself. So, Trudeau wants to make all your decisions. I think they're still locked down. I think they're still all wearing masks. I mean, it's I feel sorry for Canadian people. I really do. We
can work with you. We're happy to.
I want to take our last commercial break. Before I do that, you just came out with a new program at Boulder Longevity. And this is something that is fascinating to me because it really is the most logical first question that everyone should ask when they're trying to regain their health. And that's, where do I start? Talk about that.
So the reason we actually did this course, and it's called What to Fix First. So if you guys go to bli.academy, you can sign up for it, is because we really would as the Instagram world and the podcast world, I mean, Carl's a great podcaster because he's very scientific, but there's a lot of information being shoved out there. And we would have people come in with literally, they had these graphics of all these things we were doing, and yet their health was crappy. And so we sort of decided we needed to help people say, okay, let's start here. Let's back up. Yeah, your red light's great, your cryo's great, it's all great, but let's start here. And what do you need to really focus on first? And it was funny when I was putting together the course. I said, well, where do I start? And some people say, okay, it's got to be diet and exercise first. And in my mind, it actually came down to hormones first, because for me to take somebody who has zero hormones, no testosterone, no progesterone, no estrogen, and say, okay, get up, eat right, go to the gym, it's not going to happen. So, we sort of start with, it's a whole series of start here, next do this. This is your piecemeal to kind of, and all based on very scientific literature. That's one of our goals at bli.academy is to teach you guys, like we would teach, we would hope doctors learn. They don't learn very much anymore, but as we would hope doctors would learn. We're teaching them from scientific data, trying to bring the most recent research-based literature straight to you guys, so you guys can kind of learn as a doctor how to take control of your health. So that's what bli.academy was designed for. The What to Fix First course was to kind of say, there's all these great peptides, there's all this really cool stuff, but where do I need to start?
Yeah, so bli.academy is where people go to learn more about that. We're going to take our last commercial break. When we come back, we will work our way through all the questions that remain. And then I have a fascinating question. Apparently, you are using sildenafil for athletic performance. I had to correct myself recently, because for years I've said PDE5 inhibitors don't work on muscle tissue. Turns out that it works on muscle tissue in old guys, but not young guys, as far as increasing nitric oxide. So I'd like to hear your the work that you're doing in that area. We're talking with Dr. Elizabeth Yurth. We'll be right back with more. Stay tuned. I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have MyPillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/MyPillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Never before has a product been so appropriately named as Botanic Tonics Feel Free. This plant-based elixir combines a variety of different effective compounds, all from raw plant materials that at different doses provide you with completely different experiences. A third of a bottle puts you in the zone and makes you very focused and is ideal for a non-stimulating pre-workout. It also has a mild analgesic effect for us older lifters who have soreness and little pains and aches that keep us from training as ferociously as we want. A half a bottle will create a mild euphoric effect that will allow you to forego consuming alcohol but still be socially lubricated and have fun. I have never had a product deliver on its name the way Botanic Tonics Feel Free does, and I won't ever be without it, and you shouldn't either. Go to shrnetwork.biz/feelfree and use the code SHR40 for 40% off your first order. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. Welcome back. Okay, so let's just work our way through some of these questions here. Let's see here. The UK system sucks. He said they're only interested. This is Dean Paulson. They're only interested in giving kids sex change hormones, but none for testosterone replacement therapy. Look, it's kind of like that here in the United States too. Dean wants to know: can you mix your GLP-1 into the same pin with BPC 157?
I'm, and I know there's a lot of debate in the whole mixing peptides. I'm not a fan of mixing any peptides, sort of like CJC and ipamorelin. I do not mix peptides. I think that I think the potentially is you're making a new peptide that you don't even know about. So I'm not a fan. I know that debate is all over the board. I know John Francois has a different opinion on things. But I would definitely keep this one separate.
I'm going to post this question. It doesn't fit in the discussion today, but out of respect to somebody who's watching the show, Katrina Miller says, is there any great collagen peptide cream for vaginal health or other areas? Why would you even want collagen peptides for your vagina? I don't think that.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be in the top of my list for vaginal health. I think honestly, vaginal health is a lot more. You've got to get microbiome normal, and you have to have enough estrogen, right? So I think that hormones are going to be, by far your bigger player in for vaginal health than ever gaining more collagen. I love collagen peptides. There's a collagen peptide we use that has Fortigel in it. I love them for joints. I love them for skin. But I don't think vaginal health is going to have a big influence there. I think you're going to focus there more on making the gut microbiome healthy and having normal hormone levels.
I was just going to say, I know a woman long time ago who had what she didn't like the odor of her vagina. And she changed her diet. She started training. She really changed her lifestyle, but she didn't do it because of the way her vagina smelled. But ironically, you're giggling. See, I can make you giggle. But ironically, that when she changed her life and her lifestyle, she noticed, she said, that odor that I had for like since I was a young girl. It just went away. You know, vaginal health, it starts on the inside, like everything
Right.
else, like
Right.
like your
It's
hair,
all
like your
microbiome.
fingernails, like your skin, and everything else. So yeah, you got, and I would imagine it doesn't change overnight either. So you got to work on it. You got to work on it.
Yeah, I will tell you, like, I think one of the tricks too is making sure that you're in a more alkalotic state for kind of vaginal health. And we talk about odor, things like that. So, you know, our bodies work best metabolically and otherwise when we're more in a metabolic alkalosis. So I love, like, for some things like that, for kind of improving people who have, you know, chronic yeast infections, things like that, using Alka-Seltzer Gold, sodium potassium bicarb, basically. Use the gold because it doesn't have aspirin in it. So that's one of our little tricks that just gets people more alkalotic, and that can really help vaginal health.
Yeah, and Katrina says that she uses hormones, but asking for a friend, and that's fine. I wanted to get you answered. I just didn't know if it fit into the GLP-1. But then again, this next discussion doesn't fit in with GLP-1 either. So sildenafil is the most popular PDE5 inhibitor prescribed to men for erectile dysfunction. It hits hard. It only lasts 3 to 5 hours, which I like, by the way, because a lot of the GERD associated with PDE5 inhibitors, if you take sildenafil, you may have some heartburn, but it only lasts a couple hours. If you take, tadalafil or some of the longer acting ones, it'll last days. So I kind of like the hit hard, hit it quick, and get out kind of effects of sildenafil. But you're using it for athletic performance.
Back up. We don't use it that much for athletic performance. It is a banned substance for athletic performance for some of our WADA tested athletes. But so what I mentioned to you is actually where we're using it is because sildenafil at a low dose, like 5 milligrams daily, actually helps brown fat. So it actually turns white fat into brown fat. Very interesting thing. That's really new research on sildenafil. So it actually can help with fat loss. So you can actually use a 5 milligrams sildenafil, and then what we'll do is we'll tie that in with, we actually use what's called an angiotensin receptor blocker called telmisartan, right? Yeah. The ARBs. Telmisartan or Mycardis is actually a really impressive medication because it really helps also with fat loss, but also exercise performance. It actually kind of increases PPAR gamma. It helps with exercise performance. It also may have some significant cardiovascular benefits, and it may have some significant brain benefits by a study that just came out a few days ago. So what we do a lot for our sort of athletes, and telmisartan, interestingly enough, even though it really has been shown to have some significant improvements in exercise performance, is not a banned substance by WADA. So it's one of the few things you actually can use in our tested athletes. But using telmisartan and sildenafil 5 milligrams together, and you have to, or it's easier to get tadalafil in 5 milligrams. You have to have sildenafil compound at that low dose. Right. Sildenafil is what was tested for turning white fat into brown fat, but tadalafil might have the same effect. I don't know that. But if those two together helped both people to lose fat and increase exercise performance. So I'm not sure, again, sildenafil or tadalafil for exercise performance, they are, again, they're WADA banned substances. So maybe they do something, I don't know, in terms of exercise performance. Certainly I think maybe they might give a little bit of kind of a because of that nitric oxide boost, increased vascular flow, you might get a little more, a little bit of benefit. But when you put the two together, you can see some significant improvements, both in weight, but we use them. So we use those, in our athletes who kind of want, particularly some, for instance, I just had an endurance athlete who's like, he really wants to get off a few more pounds before this 100-mile race and not affect his performance. So that's a nice combination for things like that. So there's some interesting things that, sort of repurposing drugs that are out there that we can use for fat loss and performance.
Sildenafil has some interesting effects on fat in general, on lipids. So sildenafil can actually over months reverse fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I found very fascinating. I read this study quite a long time ago. And it has been shown to affect weight loss to some degree. I actually put something on the website probably 4 or 5 years ago when I saw a study that showed sildenafil affecting fat loss and it was both in men and women.
Right.
I said in the post, would you take Viagra if it would help you lose weight? And they all said yes. There was like a poll that I had.
We use it in our women all the time for fat loss because, again, what it seems to be doing, again, is converting white fat to brown fat. That's what we want to do. Remember, brown fat is metabolically active fat. It helps us burn calories. It keeps us warm. we got to convert the white fat to the brown fat. And sildenafil is one of the substances that seems to be able to do that. So we use it in our women, equally to our men.
So, and actually just this morning when I was at the gym, it crossed my mind to look up the effects of sildenafil on uncoupling proteins. And here's why. Because when I have used sildenafil at like 25 milligrams, my body gets hot. I mean, it gets like not feverishly hot,
right,
but clearly hot. And I thought, I wonder if it has some uncoupling effects.
And did it when you looked it up?
Oh, I didn't look. I just I was thinking about it when I was training. I thought, I got to look that up and see if it has any uncoupling effects. And I'm willing to bet that it does.
Yeah,
because it does increase body temperature.
Right, it does increase body temperature. But is that just because it increased vascular flow? I don't know. Maybe at that low dose, I'm not sure. So is that just increased vascularity? I don't know. Increased, blood pump. I don't know, but yeah, it'd be interesting to look at. I think it has a whole lot of actually beneficial effects. Probably when you start researching, it's always fun to take some of these drugs and just start, looking at their different effects in different places. And I love it's one of my, I love doing that. I love looking at things that are out there, available, already shown safe, and seeing what else we can do with them. Yes,
repurposing them. So on the last note, you'll be proud of me. I'm on 250 milligrams a week of testosterone for the first time in decades.
Yay.
You're like, well, you kept telling me, Carl, those doses are going to backfire on you eventually. I was like, well, maybe I need to stop the food. But the ironic thing was we have a new company, Inside Tracker, that's a sponsor, and they do genetic testing, and they do the whole thing. They blend everything in, and they give you a snapshot, and they make recommendations, unlike Chronomics, eat more fish. So I did my blood work with them, and they came on the show to talk about it. And the girl was kind of like, she didn't know. She says, well, I'd like to talk about your testosterone. And I said, yeah, I know. It was 4,775. And that was only on 500 milligrams a week. And that's because as you get older, men, there's an evolutionary gift provided to men that spares testosterone. There's a downregulation in the liver of testosterone receptors, so you flush less out. And I'm sure that's a result of the fact that as we got older, we produce less and less, so the body wants to conserve more and more. 500 milligrams got me to almost 5,000. So I don't know. I may have to go down to 180 milligrams a week in order to get into like the 1,100 range. So we'll see with my next test. The place to go is boulderlongevity.com or is it BLI.academy
to sign up for that What to Fix First course, or just sign up for the academy itself, because we just try and get information out. We try and, I'm researching. I'm a voracious reader. I try and keep up with this literature with you guys. And as soon as I see this cool stuff, some of the stuff we're talking about, this is all stuff that just comes out. So that you guys know what's kind of new. And I sort of screen through it to make sure it's, you got to read studies in a very sensitive fashion. Not every study is good. So we're trying to get that stuff out to you. So BLI, if you guys sign up for BLI.academy, you'll get some of that information. It's
and, for years, I said on this show, I would travel to see a good doctor. Most people choose their doctors based on geographical location and convenience and all that sort of stuff. And the reality is that's a big mistake, because you want a good doctor, not a doctor that's conveniently located near your house. But now, those of you who would have only ever been able to travel to Boulder, Colorado to see Dr. Yurth can see her on your laptop.
Yeah.
So this is a chance for those of you who have been thinking that your doctor just isn't treating you right, or they're trying to discourage you from hormone replacement therapy, or they know nothing about peptides, so they tell you summarily, oh, they're bad, don't fool with them. This is a chance to work with a great doctor from the comfort of your own kitchen table. Go to boulderlongevity.com. Reach out. What does it hurt? Reach out and find out what it costs. Reach out and find out how it works. At least you'll know what you're saying yes or no to. Dr. Yurth, thanks so much for always making time to come on the show.
Thanks, Carl. I always love talking to you.
I talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye.